Welcome to Convince Me in 15 Minutes, where we give our guests 15 minutes to convince us about timely topics in the financial services industry. Before we begin, please subscribe below. The Convince Me in 15 Minutes podcast will introduce you to new concepts, theories, philosophies, and practices in the financial services industry. Your guides are Luke Tawas and Keith Thompson. We'll follow up the initial presentation with questions. So again, subscribe below and we'll introduce our guest speaker.
Hello, my name is Robert Charette. I'm a contributing editor for IEEE Spectrum magazine, focusing on the technological risks and rewards of high tech. And I'm the author of the ebook, The EV Transition Explained. I'm here to convince you today that the imminent demise of internal combustion engine vehicles, as claimed by many, is highly exaggerated. EVs are coming, and I think they should come. But trying to get there in the time frames that we're trying to talk about, within the next 5, 10, 15 years, is going to be very difficult. Even though the curves are showing massive increases, and states like California, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and a whole bunch of others, 13 along with the District of Columbia, and it'll probably be 20 by the end of next year, are all set to basically ban ICE vehicle sales by 2035. If you really take a look at the market where we are and where we need to get to even come close to those sales targets that the Biden administration has set up, which is somewhere at least by 50% by 2030 of EV sales, of new car sales. If we take a look at what's really going on, the numbers really don't support it. If you take a look, right now, the estimated new EV light-duty sales for 2023 is about 8.9% are going to be hybrids. Those are plug-in hybrids as well as regular hybrids. And about 6.7% of battery electric vehicles. Those are ones that are only use a battery. They don't have a hybrid gasoline and electric motor together. The estimated BEV sales is about 1.4 million units in the United States. New ICE sales, though, are going to be about 12.6 million units. And what's really important is the used vehicle sales, which is 35.7 million units. If you actually take a look at total sales, used vehicles are the greatest number, and those are almost exclusively right now, and will be for a very long time, all ICE vehicles. So when you really add up the numbers, even though people talk about all these new sales numbers for EVs is climbing, and they're climbing very quickly, but they're climbing in a very small community if you take a look at total vehicle sales. Moreover, if you take a look at the existing ICE vehicle sales, there's about 250 million units in the United States. There's about 1.5 billion globally, and the production capacity globally is about 80 million units per year. So if you actually just did the numbers of, let's say you wanted to replace all 1.5 billion ICE vehicles that currently exist today, and you divide it by the 80 million, you're going to come up with about 19 years. That's as if we just were to replace them and everybody had to get rid of their ICE vehicles. So it would take you 19 years before you even could replace them, assuming that you did this one-for-one replacement. Now, even going with that, if we take a look, the other little, fly in the ointment is that the lifespan of an ICE vehicle is about 13 to 16 years now. So ICE vehicles are going to be sold for a very long time. Even if you take a look at 2035, and you say that 50 or 60%, or maybe even the optimistic folks who are talking about 80% by 2035. It's going to take a long time just for that turnover to occur, because a lot of ICE vehicles are going to be around for a very long time. If we also take a look at what's going to keep you from really turning over all the ICE vehicles, there's a lot of things that need to occur. And I call these kind of the disturbances, or the potholes in the EV idyllic dreams. And these are all interconnected. The first is infrastructure. And I'm just showing electric infrastructure right here. But there's also mining infrastructure, recycling, there's vehicle production, obviously, battery refining, mass transit, all these things that have to go in to try to approach, the climate goals that have been set out. If you take a look at electrical infrastructure, one of the biggest problems is not so much the generation, although there's a lot of issues in terms of renewables with generation, with wind power and solar. It's actually the distribution networks at the local level. Most transformers are too old to support EV charging, let alone electrification of your heat pumps and other elements within your home. So infrastructure is way behind what the policy is setting out. The other aspect is that there's now buyer pushback. We've all read in the news about EV sales slowing. Well, again, EV sales have slowed, but it's really one of the problems is that EVs are still expensive. It's not going to be for another 4 or 5 years probably before EVs on a cost basis are equivalent to ICE vehicles. And even then, that can change very rapidly. There's problems with recharging and range. The reliability of EVs is incredibly poor. If you take a look at Consumer Reports or some of the other analysts who take a look at automobile reliability, EVs are all on the bottom, including Tesla. And loyalty isn't that great either, because 20% of current EV buyers go back to either a hybrid or an ICE vehicle. Another aspect is this issue of policy conflicts. We're trying to change several fundamentals in terms of energy production and generation, as well as transportation. We're changing two mega industries simultaneously in a very short period of time. And there's lots of others, including China and the EU, who look at this as a major opportunity to overtake the U.S. in terms of automotive manufacturing. We have problems in the U.S., as we already know, about kind of the politicalization of EVs, who controls the infrastructure, and are EVs really there in terms of jobs or climate? And of course, the other little issue that comes into play is, are we just trading petroleum dependency for mineral dependency that, again, the U.S. does not have the global comparison in terms of mineral production as China does. So another issue, and this is one of many, is price wars. Now we're getting into this issue that there's going to be lots of EVs going to be introduced in the next 2 to 3 years, dozens, if not by some counts, scores of new EVs. Not everyone is going to survive. So now we're going to have this issue where do customers want to buy a new EV that's coming out if they think that that company won't survive another 3 or 4 years and support their EV? There's another issue in terms of the context reality. Right now, California is basically, for the U.S., controlling EV policy with the blessings of the Biden administration. But California is a good 20 years ahead in terms of trying to deal with EVs. What some people forget is that EVs turned up in California and Tesla's in California because the weather's very good. And it was easier to because of the mandates, political mandates in California for pollution control, to actually get EVs up and supported. There's a tremendous amount of money that goes into California to support infrastructure and other things that the other states don't have. So again, thinking that Michigan or Massachusetts or Rhode Island is just like California is really kind of crazy. The other aspect I want to talk about is, again, eventually we want to have an all EV or a 2 EV family. That's going to take a very long time. Right now, what you're seeing are people buying an EV, but also people buying an SUV or a conventional ICE vehicle, or maybe a hybrid, because, again, the issues with range, reliability, etc. I think my last point I want to make before we get into our questions is, if you really take a look, this is the total amount of energy consumption in the United States in 2022, 100.3 quads. Now, a quad is a quadrillion BTUs, or 1,000 trillion is one quad. So we're talking about 100.3 trillion BTUs of energy, which is a lot. If you take a look, you'll see that most energy, as because of how machines work, is that most energy is wasted. And so if we really take a look at transportation, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 27 quads of energy that's going to have to be replaced. Now, even if we say that EVs are 3 times more efficient than ICE vehicles, there is going to be a lot of electricity generation that's going to need to be made to support transportation. And currently, we're way down there at 0.02 quads. And so to go from 0.02 to, say, even 20, if we put in the efficiency, or 15 quads, it's going to take a very long time. So with that, that's my presentation, and I'll take any questions you have.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Bob. Very insightful. In regards to this very first slide, the question that comes to mind is the U.S. family is very different than families in emerging markets. I think if you do the math, there's about as many cars as people in the United States, which is an amazing statistic to me, in that there's a lot of people under 18 who are not driving, or those over 70 who might not be driving. So, some families really do have quite a few cars. But in China or India, I don't know the exact statistic. I know it's significantly less. Can you talk a little bit about globally, the demand for vehicles and how this might play into those growing sales?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because there's kind of two trains of thought there. One is that emerging countries do have an opportunity to move to EVs, but again, their infrastructure is not up to speed. So they have an opportunity in terms of, if they want to go in this direction, they can probably stop ICE sales much more quickly than we could in the US, because, as you point out, there's fewer ICE vehicles that they have, but their infrastructure is worse. And so it's going to take them more time to actually build that infrastructure up. Now, what you see in countries like India and other emerging areas is that it's not ICE vehicle, or not EVs, I should say. It's actually electric motorbikes, electric bikes, and others that have really taken off. And so that is a means where they might be able to have carbon reduction much quicker than we could here in the United States, or even in other places. Now, the EU, the number of vehicles being sold, EVs being sold, has gone up dramatically, but they're running into the same issue in terms of infrastructure and in terms of support. And that's in the UK, for instance, they've had to back off their 2030 ideal date to 2035, and it may even slip to 2040 before they really start banning ICE vehicle sales. Now, there's outliers like what you have in Norway. Now, Norway is kind of an interesting case. They've started on EVs for quite a long time, but they also subsidize them a tremendous amount. And their electric generation is actually almost all renewable, being dam electricity. So you're talking about hydroelectric. So each area is a little bit different. Now, China, again, has tremendous subsidies and has really pushed EVs and are the leaders in EVs. They produce more EVs and sell more EVs than anybody else in the world. And what's interesting there is now there's a worry that as they sell more EVs, you're going to have all the same problems that we have here in the United States in terms of traffic. So, it's really kind of, every country is slightly different, and every country has certain, pluses and minuses to it. Places like Indonesia, which would really like to go to EVs and have a lot of mineral deposits and think that they'll be able to manage that transition, still, again, it takes a long time to rebuild or enhance what you have to go so that you're really going to reduce your carbon footprint.
Isn't part of this too just about the geographic expanse of a region? I live in the Northeast, in the tri-state area between Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. It's a much more densely populated area. I don't have to drive 250 miles round trip to do things. So if I'm somewhere in the Midwest where, you might not have, something right next door to you. Doesn't that become problematic or more problematic for certain regions of the country than other regions of the country?
Yeah, that's a very good point. One of the big problems, and one of the things that people forget, is that anywhere from, depending on your on who you cite, it's between 75 and 80% of the United States is rural. And if you take a look at places in the Midwest and Far West, then you're talking about people who drive somewhere between, on average, 17 to 20,000 miles a year. And a lot of that mileage is also carrying trailers and other things because they're ranches and other types of farm agricultural development and support that they have. So if you talk about it, ideally, you could look at the Northeast. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I'm very familiar with that area. But again, people aren't going to drive a lot, and you could probably get away with very cheap EVs, much less costly than what's on the market today. Whereas in the Far West, you're going to need to have an EV that can easily go, 100, round trips of 300 miles a day, for a lot of the population. One of the things too that, again, is kind of one of these things that hold people back, especially out in the Far West, is that a lot of these folks, their battery will, we talk about battery warranties of being 8, and now they're trying to push it to 10 years. Well, these people are going to be running their batteries out in 5 or less. And so what's the replacement cost for an EV battery? Now, people, there's some claims that the batteries that are coming down the line will last 20 years. But again, that's speculative because we don't have these batteries and they haven't been around for 20 years. So again, geography matters a lot. Traffic density matters a lot. And, if we could, I used to live in the UK. I used to live in downtown London. When I was there in the mid 1980s, you didn't really need to drive. There was a tremendous amount of taxis and buses, and the tube went everywhere. And they've turned into a car culture in the UK like we have. And so that's become, this big, issue in terms of what should we do? Should we actually, move to EVs, or should we be moving to reduce the number of vehicles that we own and have more mass transit? And so that's another issue of the infrastructure that, again, people don't talk about very much.
Can you maybe expand your thoughts, Bob, in regards to minerals? I would have thought that one of the slides you would have shown here would have shown how difficult it is to get copper or lithium here in the United States to build some of these vehicles.
Well, I consider that part of the infrastructure. Right now, we have very few mines in the United States for lithium, nickel, copper, and we have almost no refinery capacity in the United States, even if we had these mines. So we're dependent on basically going out and finding production and finding making agreements with mining companies in foreign countries. Now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of lithium mines are controlled by China. And they also have the largest amount of refining capacity, and that includes cobalt, nickel, other minerals that are needed for production of batteries for EVs. So what we have is a massive bottleneck. And in fact, depending on, again, who you talk to, people at Stellantis, for instance, claim that they expect that battery minerals for lithium for battery production will be probably in extremely short supply by 2026, 2027. Now, given the slowdown in EVs sales, that may not be true. That might take a little bit longer. But at some point, there are massive bottlenecks. And from an environmental standpoint, it's very, very difficult to open mines in the United States, and it's very difficult to open up refineries. So again, that's one of those core bottlenecks that, again, is going to potentially play out. If we get into some political conflict with China, they could very easily cut our supplies, cut U.S. manufacturers, in fact, world supplies, global supplies of lithium and other critical minerals. They were already starting to do that with graphite, which is, again, very important for the production of batteries. So, again, this is one of those really sensitive topics. You don't see this talked about a lot in the press. That this supply chain issue is really huge. And even what's also not talked about, there's two other issues that go with the supply chain of minerals for batteries, is that the most of the mining, refining, battery production, there's a tremendous amount of software support that's needed to actually run these facilities. The mines, especially, it surprised me when I was digging into the story of how much software, how much computer power they actually need to run their trucks, the other elements that they have in terms of mining equipment. They don't have any skills. There's skills shortages across the logistic supply chain. They don't have any people. They don't have people with expertise. So this is also going to be something that, again, as you build up these battery plants, where's that expertise going to come from? There's a big debate right now in Canada because there's a new battery plant that's being opened up. And for the startup, they're going to bring in lots of workers from Taiwan to help set it up because there aren't skills here in the United States or in Canada to set up battery plants. But that battery plant was tremendously subsidized by the Canadian government. So now the union in Canada, the workers at the battery plant are all saying, well, wait a minute, you're bringing in all these foreigners to work on our plant, where I thought those were jobs for Canadians. So again, every one of these things has a little string that if you pull goes off to something else, and again is another roadblock in this whole process.
But this very last chart, Bob, makes me think about when all the telecoms were spending billions and billions and billions of dollars of upgrading the cell phone towers so our cell phones could work much faster and better, working on densification and latency and lots of other things. But the true beneficiaries of those were really Apple, who sold more cell phones. It was Facebook, who could allow you to take pictures on your cell phone and post it immediately to update friends and family what you were doing. So based on this, from an investment standpoint, what areas do you think will benefit most if we are going to be plugging in more vehicles in the future?
Well, I would actually be looking at the utility companies. That's where the tremendous amount of build out is going to have to occur. We're talking about the replacement, for instance, of probably 8 to 10 million line transformers and poles, because the transformers you need to support electrification are much bigger, have to be more reliable, and those things are heavier, so you need to have more poles. If you were really looking at an investment, you might look at the companies who make poles for electric lines and telephone lines, because they run together. I think the other aspect, again, is right now there's going to be a lot of money that's going to be required to support, I think, a lot of the electrification of the charging network. There's still a lot that has to be done in that area. Right now, I'm not sure that it's good to invest right now, because a lot of these charging companies are running out of money, because it's hard to make money in charging right now because we don't have enough EVs and there's too many charging companies. And so, there's going to be consolidation in those areas. I think the other thing is that there's probably going to have to be consolidation in utility companies, because, again, I'm not sure that, there's 3,000 utility companies in the United States. I'm not sure all of them are going to have the financial wherewithal to be able to do this transformation. So looking at who might be open to being merged or being bought out, I think might be an interesting trend to take a look at. There's a lot of these small things that again, people we haven't, because we haven't got there in scale, and scale is the big driver here. When you go to scale, you have to make massive transformations, and so there's lots of these small things that everybody assumes are going to be working okay, and they're not going to be once we really start doing the build out of EVs. So again, I don't think ICE vehicles are going to go away anytime soon, but the electrification of the United States is definitely going to come. How fast is really the only question.
Well, Bob, I mean, you've covered a lot of materials today. Can you share with us the current timelines for electric vehicles and what you think is a more realistic timeline for electric vehicles?
Well, I think that the timeline is going to be, will probably be at 30 to 35% by 2030. And again, that assumes that a lot of the infrastructure is built out, that we get the minerals, we get the battery production, and the prices come down. I think we're not going to see anywhere near 75 or 80% before 2040 at the earliest, probably closer to 2050. I think it's going to take a very, very long time for this transition. Other people are claiming that by 2035 we'll be at 85 to 90%. And I just don't see it. I think we're going to, again, we may have a large ramp up where people change half, if they're a two car family, one might be an EV, the other one's going to be an ICE, and probably a hybrid over time. But it's going to take a long, long time before, at least in the United States, before everybody trades in their ICE vehicles only for EVs.
And over that length of time, the technology shift and changes are going to be so dramatic where driverless automobiles may throw an incredible wrench in that works also, in terms of the sheer number of automobiles that are even owned.
Right. And there's other things that are coming out too. There's something called nanoelectric fuel, which is a way to basically power your electric vehicle, your battery, using a flow battery, but you actually pump in a chemical solution into your car and out of your car. Basically, it's like having a gasoline car, except that you're using an electrolyte instead. And that's coming out. And that's already technology is being supported by DARPA, Air Force, NASA. Lots of people are looking at it. And I expect that technology could really throw a major monkey wrench into everything, because it actually has a higher energy density than lithium, and it's going to be easier. It doesn't catch fire, and it's easy to make. And once you make enough nanoelectric fuel, you basically are energy independent forever. So
electric vehicles may be the Betamax of vehicles.
Well, you might have at least BEV, at least electric battery, in terms of our lithium battery. These are electric, again, a flow battery is an electric battery, but it's a different type of chemistry altogether, and one that has a tremendous amount of benefit. And so there's lots of these other technologies that are coming to fruition. So again, I'm making a lot of assumptions about 2040, 45, 2050. But again, if you have some other technology that really has a major breakthrough, then all bets are off. I don't know, maybe everybody will have a flying car by then.
So Bob, can you share with everyone where they can find some additional information if they'd like to learn more?
Sure. Well, I wrote this ebook for IEEE Spectrum magazine. It's 49 pages. If you go to IEEE Spectrum, just on the web, and look for the EV transition, you can download it for free. It's a nice PDF. And there's a number of other articles I've written on EVs, one on nanoelectric fuel that will be coming out shortly, as well as the issues of charging for problems of renters in charging, and also in terms of just the whole, how do you support the infrastructure?
Well, Bob, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's been very informative. Certainly would love to have you back on again. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining Convince Me in 15 Minutes. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe below. If you'd like to be our guest, please reach out to us on LinkedIn.